Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, Hope More audience. Listen, you guys, sorry I'm a little bit late, but this was worth the wait. We have a great show. Did y'all miss me from last weekend? Last week we talked about winning in the wilderness, and I think I'm gonna take off my jacket. I was trying to be cute, but it's hot up in here. So we talked about winning in the wilderness, and then we talked about prior to that we had a lot of different things about the elections and being counted, and then this past summer we had the 1 week Juneteenth celebration. So it's just really been great. I want to thank all of you who've been on liking my page and liking and viewing. And for those of you who are on YouTube, we thank you for adding your subscription and hitting the little bell so you'll be notified when our show is on the Hope More YouTube channel. We just thank you so much. Last week, more than one show went over 2,000 views. And I know that may mean 1 minute till all the show has been seen, but I appreciate it so much. I don't take it for granted. So besides this perspiration, you know what else may be contagious around here? I think that in this season where everyone's talking about washing their hands and wearing face shields because COVID-19 is so contagious, and we can get so preoccupied with the contagion, COVID-19 or the coronavirus, or the fact that you can infect someone unaware, that sometimes it almost seems like worship. Like we talk more about COVID-19 and oh hell, COVID-19. We have more of a fear of COVID-19 than a fear of God. And we know that the fear of God is the beginning of what? Knowledge, wisdom, all of the above. So what I wanted to do is talk about those good things, those godly character things that causes us to be infectious in our generation. Those things that cause us to be contagious, but hopefully not asymptomatic, that we literally have the symptoms, right? We are dealing with grace, kindness, unity, a desire to reach out beyond just what we have in our own four walls of our home. And these guests are the perfect guests to get us started. Oh my God, there's so much I can say, but I'm gonna let them introduce themselves. They are Pastor Stephan Bell and Pastor Ron Green of One Church Atlanta. As many people may be watching who are from what used to be called Divine Order Church. That was a church I was a part of. I was a charter member, but now it's merged with this other wonderful organization and become One Church Atlanta. So I'm no longer a charter member. I'm just representing now. Yep, I do, because I am. That was our church shirt back in the day, but now it's just a memento of what once was. Now what we see is like literally the Bible being realized, that Jesus Christ, when he died or prior to his death, his prayer was that the disciples would become one as he and the Father are one. So let's talk about it today. What's highly contagious? Unity and outreach. You know what? I dropped my phone, and that's just the enemy. Can I blame it on the enemy? Can I be a good church girl and blame it on the enemy? But listen, guys, I need you to share. Hey, Tracy, good morning. I need you to share. Share to your page. Share to groups that you think would like this show. Share. And if I had my phone, I would show you how to do it, because I got to share it to my page. But without further ado, I'm going to let these handsome, godly, spiritual, loving father husbands get on the screen and talk to us, because they are highly contagious. So I need applause. Yes, I need applause. I need people get on here and like. We're going to James Brown this thing. They're not coming out until I see a little bit more likes. And I know half of that is because I didn't share it yet. But, oh, wait a minute. I hear the applause and I feel the energy. Maybe that's why I'm hot up in here. Yes. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to bring them on. Pastor Rod and Pastor Stephan. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. You know what? I'm going to let you guys introduce yourself. And you know what, Pastor Rod? Forgive me. My default often is to start off with Pastor Stephan and then you, only because I've known him. But I know you guys are one. So what I'm going to ask you to do is introduce yourselves to my audience. Let them know just a little bit about yourself, what everything is significant, and your role with One Church Atlanta.
Thank you, Hope, and good morning to your audience. As she stated, I'm Rod Green, pastor of One Church ATL, and I was formerly the pastor of Greater Works Fellowship, and this ministry was founded by my wife, Tanya, and I about 6 years ago here in the local Atlanta area. And we were actually a missional outreach ministry that really did focus on our community and spreading the gospel and becoming contagious. And so I'm glad that my wife and I, along with Pastor Bill and his beautiful wife, are now doing ministry. We've been married 23 years, Tanya and I. We have two daughters, Kayla, age 16, and Kendall, age 13. And she thinks she's going on 30 now, as most soon to be are. And we're loving ministry, we're loving life. I am also bivocational, and on the side, also involve myself in wealth management, which is another way that I love to serve the community in financial literacy. But just glad to be on this show and glad to be discussing some things that are near and dear to Pastor Bill and our heart, which is unity and oneness and outreach. So God bless you and thank you for having us on.
And Hope, I share Pastor Rod's appreciation for you having us on. This is awesome to be on the Hope More show. I'm a person who's enthusiastic to watch you weekly. I love your conversation. I love what your guests and you have to share with the community. Again, I'm Pastor Stephan Bell. I am what we call the maturity pastor at One Church ATL. And you're going to hear some similarities in my introduction that Pastor Rod shared. And that is in October 2014, two churches were birthed. They knew nothing about one another. And we were born also Divine Order Church at that time, also born at the same time. I'm also bivocational. As you may know, Hope, I, of course, spent most of my years in federal government relations in Washington. But also I help here in the community with the school system when I can. But also I am, more importantly, the husband of Desma Bell. That's the most important achievement in my life. We've been together for 28 years. We've been dating since we were actually 15 years old. And now I'm happily married to that woman. We have two children, Summer, who's 22, and my son Solomon, who's serving his country as an airman in the United States Air Force, who's 19. And just glad to be here. Look forward to talking to you. And let's listen and have a good time.
Yes, thank you all so much. That is so interesting how you guys were birthing babies at the same time. Right. It's like you had twins in the spirit with the same father, but like ghetto twins. I'm joking. Pastor Rod, you'll understand my humor before it's all over. It's a little irreverent.
That's okay.
I say, like, one of the great things about being a pastor's kid is not being afraid of things regarding God and church and pastors. And one of the bad things is that we can get a little bit too familiar because it was our playground too. So I make some jokes that may not be great, particularly like at funerals and those things that you're drugged to as a pastor's kid. Like, listen, if I gotta be here, I gotta make myself happy. So, but thank you all so much for coming on. Well, listen, what I shared with my audience and shared with you is that we want to focus on being contagious in this season. And I can't wait to hear more about your unity story, and maybe we should go. I was trying not to go necessarily in sequence, but maybe it'll make your outreach story more understandable. But could you just tell us, Pastor Rod, as Pastor Bell just said, that you both were starting churches around the same time in 2014. What led you to even want to be a pastor or start a church?
Great question. And literally October of 2014 was when both of our ministries were birthed in the same month. But I was one, Hope, that never really wanted to be a pastor. And, those are things growing up in the church, growing up Church of God in Christ, every time someone came in. Yes.
Pastor Bell, you hooked up with a little Pentecostal?
Yes.
I'm going to get comfortable now.
So, growing up in the church, I've heard it all my life that I was called. And then my mother and my parents sent me to a Christian school. And so everything about me was was pushing me toward ministry. So I did like most people do. I ran in the opposite direction and tried to get into everything. Even at a Christian university, we tried to see how much trouble we can get into, and we did. You know, I was very accomplished at the Christian university and breaking off as many rules as I could while I was there. And so, you know, but you move on and you live life, and so always had an affinity for serving people. And around 2010 is when I really began to get serious about God and understood that I did in fact have a call on my life. And then around 2013, the Holy Spirit was just nudging at me that it was time to take my walk a little further. And literally within a small time span, there were 3 different people that came up to me and said, you know, Rod, you're supposed to teach me the word of God. And these were 3 unrelated people, and it literally happened within the same week. And so the third person that said it, I said, okay, God, I get it. You want me to? So we started Bible study in the home, like a lot of churches are birthed. And this was the beginning of 2014. And literally, while we were starting the Bible study in the home, my wife Tanya and I, God had begun to deal with me about going out and looking for property. And I'm like, God, I remember the night that he really spoke it to me. That night at Bible study, we had 1 person that showed up. So there were 5 people that was there, my wife and 2 daughters and the 1 person that showed up. And I'm like, God, why do we need a building? Because my home is sufficient. And so literally we went out and found a building a few weeks later. Not only did we find 1 building, we found 2 buildings. And the same day that we signed the lease, we got a call from an organization that was shutting down. And they said, hey, we heard about you starting a ministry. So come, and anything that's in this was a 30,000 square foot commercial building. They said, come and get anything you need out of it. So that day when we said yes to obeying God for the building, we went and got all the chairs and tables and everything we needed, TVs off the wall, projectors. They gave us access to the entire building. We basically furnished our church just through obedience. And so it was one of those things, to answer your question, that I never wanted. I never wanted to be a pastor. But God chose me, and to this day, I'm grateful for the call.
Wow, how awesome is that? The people are like, I need you to be my pastor. Like, wait a minute, I need you to teach me the word. But
Yeah.
That is such a wonderful story. It's nothing like the vision of God. There's provision. And you stepped out. And I understand that, because me and my brother, when my dad started the church in Perry, because he and my mom served under my grandmother, who was a pastor in another area. And it was me. He played the drums. I helped with worship. Like, we were the best members for the longest time. And God just opened up the door like that just because of your step of obedience. So let me ask you, how'd you meet this guy over here? Did you know him at the time?
No, I didn't know him. And so there was a mutual friend of ours, and I think you know Pastor Damian Boyd.
Yes, he's part of 12.
Yeah, so just so you know, I actually attended Destiny from 2003. And so, that's how I met a lot of people that we all know together. We have a lot of mutual friends because we started there. And so I met, Pastor Damian and I was conversing about doing ministry together. And so he said, let's get together and talk about it. So we met at a coffee shop, and that day I met Pastor Stephan Bell. And so I know he'll talk about it, but we shortly thereafter decided that we wanted to become friends. We had a lot of things in common, and we're both cray, a little on the cray side.
Oh, really?
So that was really where we, had an affinity toward each other.
Are you a little Bible nerd too?
I'm not as nerdy as he is with the Bible, but I do love the word like he does. But I'm as crazy as he is. I can certainly say that. But I want to say this, Hope, and I'll turn it over to Pastor Stephan. I had attempted to do ministry with other pastors before really getting to know them and forging friendships. And I had come to a point in my life where I said, I don't want to do that anymore, because it wasn't the most effective way that I had learned to put the cart before the horse and do ministry before you really had developed a relationship. So Pastor Bell and I decided that we wanted to become friends. And really, we had never thought about doing ministry together. We just really liked being around each other and said, you know what, let's hang out. And that's how it started.
That is so great. As a minister myself, seeing my parents grow up, and I don't think they'll mind me sharing this, but particularly my mother, she was very loved and people were around her, and youth, I know that's like your heartbeat, you and your wife's youth loved her. And I'm like, she's so strict. Why do they love her? Because she's the kind that's like, you don't need to be sleeping in with nobody, ain't your husband. Like, she would get in people's faces. And so she was much beloved, and a lot of people like to be around her. But what has glaringly become a truthful statement that I see in her life is that she really didn't cultivate friendships. She really did. And maybe because she said some of it was because she was spoiled. She had 2 or 3 other sisters in ministry and they were very close, but she really never let her guard down in front of people and around people. So now that she's 75, when she was 73, it took all I could to get her to go to senior center, because she's not pastor there. She's not teacher there. She's just with people. And I think, unlike her, my dad, he has 12 brothers, so he's also close to them, but he didn't seem to have a problem. It was very, very different. So, but as a minister myself, one of the things I deal with is like, leadership is lonely, but one of the, being that I hate that word church hurt, but because I had situations where I became friends with people at church, and maybe for whatever reason, they no longer went to that church, it seemed to like really pull at the fibers of our friendship. I was really gun shy about making friends with people in ministry. So I can sort of understand that a little bit, just like it's just a lot. And when you're a pastor and a leader, you definitely have to be careful who you align with, because you can invite them over to your church and they start talking about crazy doctrine, and you put them up in front of your people and they're like, well, you must be what my pastor believes, and then you have to deal with the aftermath. So Pastor Bell, Pastor Stephan, and for those of you who don't know, which many of you may not, but he and I were a part of the 12. 12 candidates for ordained ministry at Destiny Metropolitan Worship Church. You heard Pastor Rob mention Destiny. That was in Atlanta, Georgia. I was a part of that ministry for 19 years. And but we were part of the first official class of ministers, Pastor Bell and I. And so that's where I got to know him more, but I'd already seen him at work with barbecue in the men's ministry. But, I just fell in love with him and Desmond and their heart. And so I know a little bit of this story, and so I'm gonna like act like I'm hearing it for the first time. But Pastor Bell, Minister Bell, at one point, what sort of pushed you to become a pastor and not just become a pastor, but start a church?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for allowing me to cheat off of your papers when we were going through training. You didn't cover up well, and I appreciate you. Well, what happened with me is God is he sends the saints after you, right, Rod? Early in your life, where people are telling you you're going to pastor one day, you're going to pastor, and I'm, of course, like Rod, Pastor Rod, I am trying my best to defeat that calling. I did it all my life, and I worked hard at it to prove to the world I would never be a pastor. September 2013, I was ministering at the former church, and the Lord started tugging. He gave me an appetite for his word to really go into a year of study, just intense study. And of course, I didn't know why. I just fell in love with the word and couldn't stop. The history of it, the doctrine, even my individual theology, those things were very important to me for a year. And at the end of that year, right at about a year, I informed, the Lord told me, invite 40 friends to your house and tell them what you're doing. And of course, I think you may remember that. And,
yes.
And the 40 people came. It was 40 invited, 40 came. And I announced that God had called me to pastor. And we asked for 2 things. And you remember, one was either you pray for us or see what you can do to just help us figure this thing out. And of that group, we had a significant number of the group say, we're going to go with you. We're going to do this and go with this church plant experience. And so in 2014, Divine Order Church, affectionately known as the Doc, was born. And from that time, I think we did ministry the way God would have wanted it to be, with excellence, to glorify his name. And then came my new golfing buddy, my basketball friend.
Oh, is that what it was?
It's everything. We do everything. We got so much in common. And so we were golfing buddies and basketball partners before we even start thinking about a church unification. I think what God wanted us to do is to create that relationship, that David-Jonathan relationship, that we loved each other first before we even thought about this type of experience, because he knew that it would take work and that two workers had to be in love with him first, but then love each other second to make this thing to what it is today. So One Church ATL was birthed from that. We went through a season of fasting, for a period of fasting with our wives, because we were doing these services together, right? We would just say, and he and I both have a heart. We're not where we want to be in our own building all the time, right? So we would say, hey, why don't we get together, do service together this time, shut our doors and go to your church. And we did that. We go back and forth. And finally, we started having our members asking questions. Why don't we just do this all the time? And Rod and I looked at each other and said, no, that's not what we were called to do here. But God has a funny way of doing what he wants to do. And after prayer and fasting with our wives, we did it together as couples. Then we included our leaders, and we did fasting and praying, and we finally decided that God was right and we didn't have a choice. And now today I am very happy to be that maturity pastor at One Church ATL.
You know, this is a miracle, right? You know, you all both starting churches and being the senior pastor of those churches and say, you know what, we're going to merge, you know, we're going to both come in on equal footing. Like we're not all of a sudden the doc, something. And Pastor Ron, I forgot the name of your former ministry.
Greater Works Fellowship.
Okay, so you didn't become Greater Divine Works Fellowship. You all saw a need of becoming one. And it's funny because as a person, I got to be like senior minister at Divine Order Church and was over worship at Divine Order Church. And I got to see Pastor Bell grow as a pastor. And I got some stories for you. But I mean, I remember moments when God like convicted me, like, this is not your brother, fellow colleague minister. This is your pastor. And I had to come back and apologize sometimes. But, you know, not that anyone ever has a problem with their worship leader. I'm sure they're always just no one has a difference of opinion about the music selection. But just to see you grow, Pastor Bell, in that way, why I say it was a miracle, because I always thought more than any pastor, and I've had some amazing pastors, including my parents, that I've ever had, you've been the most open to do church fellowships with other churches. You know, I remember we did Christmas services with, I think it's Church Cobb or Northwest or North, Lord, I may be saying the church wrong. Or you would invite, you know, Roy Barrett, one of my best friends, and from Discover Life. You just always been very, very open to share your pulpit, Pastor Bell, or share something with another church, you know, whether it's marital boot camp or whatever. So seeing you guys together wasn't like extraordinarily different for me, but there was a moment where I'm like, this is like the fifth time it feels like I've seen them together, and it crossed my mind like, I wonder if they would come together. So when Pastor Bell called and told me, I was like, I already knew. I didn't know, but it didn't surprise me because Pastor Bell's heart is a collaborator. But let's just be honest, although, you know, okay, I'm just gonna, can we get real?
Yeah,
I never really talked to Pastor Green before, so I don't want to leave a bad taste. But as a predominantly Black church, although it's not a Black church, you have members of everyone's welcome, and I love that. In fact, the doc used to have services in a Korean Seventh-day Adventist church, and I used to love like passing little Korean members there. But as a Black church, the church is traditionally one of the highest, congregations or gatherings you can have, and the pastor is king. In so many communities, the pastor is king. And no way is a king gonna share his throne with anybody. I mean, that's why you can go, and you know, Pentecostals are particularly good for this. You go down one church, you see one little, you know, storefront that got 5 members. This one maybe got 6. Maybe this one has 30 and this one has 100. And not that they shouldn't be there. I'm not saying that. But people are really big about their own little fiefdoms. You know, you're the pastor of this group of people. Oh God, this would probably be a 5-hour show if you can say and answer all this. But what ways did you have to sort of get over in your own mind the idea of joining with another congregation who wasn't as familiar, or they didn't, like when they joined, they didn't choose you. They chose Pastor Green and vice versa. Like, what type of gymnastics do you have to get over in your mind about unifying that way?
Let me just say this first part to your first point. When you talked about the pastors being kings, I think what has made this so special for Pastor Bell and I is we understand who the King of Kings is.
Absolutely.
I want to put my hands up so you guys can see.
Yeah.
We understand who the King of Kings is, and so we understand that we are as ambassadors of his kingdom. He and I both had the same mentality before we met each other. That it was never about us. It was about advancing his kingdom. So that part of it was easy for us. I don't think, and I can speak for myself, and I know I can speak for Pastor Bell, giving up something was never crossed my mind that I was going to be giving up something.
Right.
I only ever looked at it as I was gaining something. And that's the only way that I've ever looked at it. It's never been about subtraction. It's been about multiplication. And that's what true unity is multiplication. That's why God says, be fruitful and multiply. He never said be fruitful and add from the union of Adam and Eve. So for us, it's been about multiplication. Everything that we've discussed, every conversation we've had has been about how do we multiply in God's kingdom. And so we have the same mentality, which is unfortunately unusual, especially in our community. But I believe, hope that this is the model. This is the blueprint for our minority churches, that we can come together and we can do more together because we're stronger together, unified, than we are operating independently of each other.
And I just add to that, Hope. We always say this between us, you know, what we look at when it comes to Christianity, it should be about kingdom. And too often in the church community, black, white, whatever race, has been more about your palace than more about the kingdom itself. And so what you have here is two people who resist the palace mentality. We don't want our faces on things. We don't want, we always say this, don't ever say one church is Rod Green's, that's Rod Green's church. That's Stephan Bell's church. No, this is God's church. We just happen to have to be the stewards. Remember, the Bible says that for which you give, much is required. This is a burden here. We know what Timothy says in the letter to Timothy, what it says about what our burden is, what Titus says. We have a burden to carry. And so since that's the situation, I don't want Stephan Bell's name on stuff. I prefer it to be one church Atlanta, the members of that church, and God leading it. We just happen to be responsible in the end for the results and how they turn out. And so that's why, and Rod, I tell Rod all the time, I'm saying this publicly, I love him as a brother. And when I say that, it couldn't have been too many other people I could have done this with, because his heart is pure. And God showed me that early on and continues to show me that even when times are not good. And so I'm thankful to God for that.
And, you know, and I've experienced the truth in that. Pastor Bell is one of the most humble, gracious men of God I've ever met. And when he says he hates anyone describing it as someone's church, and again, Pastor Bell, we have so many memories, but I don't know if you remember, you probably blotted it out of your mind, but it was one of our lovely fellowship conversations, and we didn't have a lot of disagreements, but
no, I don't even remember what
so you can imagine. And I knew how to get him but still sound respectful, and I was like, okay, we'll do whatever you want. It's your church.
Yeah, I remember.
Ooh, it's your church. We'll do it. It's your church. It's your church. And I knew that cut him, because I knew that's not how he thinks. But he, you know, being the lobbyist and the collaborator that he is, he's sort of like, and then I end up having to come back and apologize and repent. But that is so good. And I think, especially in this world where even before COVID-19, you have all these churches and really amazing leaders and congregations having to decide to close, having to decide they cannot maintain, or maybe there's a vacuum in leadership because a pastor has been replaced. I think if more people were open to connecting to another congregation, like wholeheartedly, like, hey, let's put our resources together, more churches would survive. And what was so amazing about your story is that neither one of you were in those type of situations. You didn't get together to survive. You got together out of unity and obeying the Father. So, but I think, maybe one thing you all could do in the future as you memorialize all the changes and shifts and, the compromise and the maybe side meetings you have to have. And, because it's not just the two pastors coming together. It's, I'm guessing, two worship leaders coming together, two board of elders, so people, everyone has a different curve when it comes to change. And it would probably be a great book for you all to write, like, I don't know what to call, like merging, the urge to merge.
Write it down, bro.
There it is.
But I just think it's such a wonderful thing, because we're going to start talking about outreach. You all decided to come together in 2019, correct? Well, the decision was made. Mm-hmm. It may not have been shared publicly, but the decision was made. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So, and so you guys were doing all the prep work for your leaders and how we're going to do this and that. And your first official merge service was when?
March 15th.
Okay, you guys, anybody remember where you were March 15th? What about March 16th, March 17th? For those of you who may not remember, there was this organization, or is, called the CDC, that released heavily suggested guidelines that for most states turned into stay-at-home orders. So you have this big service, and at another time, I want to do all those memories, because I love church gatherings, and as most people now are more hungry for them than ever. We didn't know what we had when we had it, right? So you have your first service, March 15th. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, when you first started hearing about, excuse me, suggestions for businesses, churches, and schools to not meet in a building, let me ask you and I'll start with Pastor Bell. What was your first thoughts on it? And maybe Pastor Rod, you can tell us what you guys decided to do and how did you come up with that? So when you first heard it, what was your thoughts about that?
Well, we had to make even a real-time decision on whether to meet on the 15th of March. We had to decide whether or not we should do that, because remember, this phenomenon called COVID-19 was so new to everyone. We didn't know what it was. And so we actually, and I can give you some of the dates that came up. We said we're going to do our last service March 15th. We'll come back the first week in April. That's how we thought this thing was going to roll out, because of course, right, the whole country was going to shut down at one time so it wouldn't spread like the other countries did. And so we actually thought we'd come back April. Then we thought we'd come back in May for Mother's Day. That didn't happen. And we're still today, as we speak, we're not meeting in the building, which has been to the largest extent a benefit because of how God wanted us to do ministry as a church. So that's what we're right now just waiting on the right time. We're praying consistently. We've employed the services of a very, very, very prepared healthcare team in the church that are all professionals, some from the CDC, some from local greater health systems, and they're going to make the decision, not us, with the board of elders when we should come back. And so we're doing church. We're doing the church outside of the building the best we can. I think God is smiling on us for what we're doing.
Wow. Well, Pastor Rod, I guess Pastor Bell sort of like went into what you guys end up doing. But let me ask, as you reflect on the fact that you not knowing, but of course God knowing, that your first service was going to be your last, not last, but last in person for a while. In reflection, do you find it beneficial? Do you find there any particular benefit of being together now that you're having to go through this COVID-19, where the congregation is meeting online in other ways, but not in person?
I would say emphatically yes. I find it extremely beneficial, especially from a legacy greater works perspective. At the time, we didn't have some of the resources that Divine Order had from a production standpoint. And so God is so wise, and in his infinite wisdom allowed us to come together a few weeks before, we know what we know today about COVID, because Pastor Bill and I immediately began to pray and say, how do we move forward? Because at this time, everybody was doing the Zoom calls and we were doing Zoom meetings and Zoom services. But we said, God, what is it that you want us to do in this season until we come back? And like Pastor Bell said, we only thought, okay, it'll be a couple of weeks and then and here we are months later. But we decided for our online presence, and we began to just strategize, and we went out and bought equipment that we didn't have, because we said, God, if this is what you're asking us to do, and to present your gospel this way, we want to do it with excellence. So we just wrapped our minds around what God was asking us to do in that hour, and we just moved forward with it. And so I would say it was God all the way through and through to allow us to come together before that, because I don't think, with hindsight being 2020, that we would have not had any of the impact that we would have had we still been Divine Order Church and Greater Works.
Absolutely.
No question about that.
Wow. Well, can we talk about some of those impacts? And let me just tell you, because I am such a church girl, not just a PK. I mean, my parents are blessed. You didn't have to convince me to love the Lord. And then I grew up Holiness Pentecostal. So the music, was such a natural vein for me to really, really explore in ministry and different things of that nature. But I love watching services online, even before COVID-19. And now I really been enjoying it, because now we have my parents and my the churches that we're a part of, they've been having drive-in services. And because it's hot in Florida, we keep it like to an hour. And if any of y'all are Holiness Pentecostal, y'all realize in an hour service, no Sunday school, no post service, no night service, is like, you realize there's other things you can do on a Sunday. So we get an hour, and then like between the next service in the other city, I'm like looking to see, I'm literally jumping in. I'm church hopping online. Right. And when I go to excuse me, I'm so sorry. It's a habit. When I go to One Church Atlanta, you all have one of the best productions and full uses of well, how could I? Well, yeah, one of the best productions I feel that's really appropriate for online services, because it's not just, and there's nothing wrong with it, because shoot, I love Facebook Live. We have, we go from a modest church of a few people, and then like 100 people watch your service. Like, we wouldn't have had that outside of COVID. But I love how you all will do basically music videos, and it'll show you in the community, and you really use production to help have to really put forth your message. Is more than just filming you while you do church the way you normally do it. And so I think it's so powerful. And in watching, I couldn't help but be so excited about the different opportunities of outreach. So let me talk, Pastor Bell, real quick with you. I'm going to ask you to talk about inReach, and Pastor Green talk about outreach. All of his outreach, but I got so tickled, because I know you and Desmond so well, that of seeing you during COVID-19, especially at the beginning, like doing like drop-ins on members to say hello after after not having in-person service and for so long, and you were filming it. And I think maybe Pastor Rob was somewhere else doing it with his wife. And I was just like, I love that, because especially after so many weeks, and depending on families, people are really isolated, and especially at the beginning. So how did you come up with that idea, and what are other things you've done to sort of stay connected inwardly or to your members? What kind of things have you done to stay connected even though you're online for service?
I can tell you this. I think the blessing again of what God has done to create this partnership is that you have two shepherd pastors. And so with shepherds, they want to spend time with the people they serve. And so selfishly, those drive-bys were 50-50. Those drive-bys were for us because we missed the people that we serve. And so with COVID-19, we're so detached, and a call doesn't do it all the time. So we said this, and it was really Pastor Rod's idea. He and Tanya, they said, let's do drive-bys because they've done it before. And Des and I said, let's get in our 2 cars. We'll pack some snacks up in the car. And for the next 7 hours, we're going to map out the city of Atlanta by zip code. And we're going to go from house to house. We dropped off gifts to our family. We spent time in driveways more than 6 feet apart. We do have some members who are veteran huggers. And so we had to kind of, say, not this time. Fist bump, elbow bump, or something. And I'll be honest, a couple of hugs did get in. We prayed about those afterwards, but we did that because we missed them, and we miss them more now. And so we are planning the next one for our One Church ATL members who are watching. Be prepared. We cometh, and we cometh bearing gifts of frankincense and myrrh. And so be prepared for us. And so we're coming to do that more, but we just miss them. So we make phone calls daily to our members just to make sure we don't miss our fix of love and attachment to the people we serve. One thing One Church ATL is going to have forever, and that's 2 pastors who don't have armor bearers pushing them to their office. I can't do that, Pastor Rod. I can't. Yeah. I want to be where everyone I can touch them. I want to be able to talk to them and hug the babies. And that's what we want to do. And also internally, we talked about the drive-bys. Internally, our ministries are still active. We have a very functioning men's ministry under the leadership of Glenn Johnson at One Church ATL. And we're hiking the mountain every week on Saturdays, the men together. We get to the top of the mountain. We pray every week together as men. And on Mondays, we have a discussion, most of them revolving around social injustice, because sometimes men need to have these conversations. And from that has been birthed real, actual action items that Pastor Rod will go talk about in just a second that have occurred, that have affected our community already when it comes to policing in our community. And so we're doing that. Our women's ministry is meeting bi-weekly to bring our women together. Our marriage ministry meets every month. We're starting a wonderful learning series this month in fourth week in August, fourth Saturday in August. We had a cooking class together on Zoom. It was so much fun. We danced in kitchens. We sung songs. We fell in love all over again over food. So internally, we're going. And I just want to say this before I turn it over to Pastor. That presentation that you see on Sunday, it does take effort. So I just want to publicly.
It takes a lot of effort.
It's a lot of effort, but we are blessed with one of the greatest production leaders in the country, in Gary Brooks, who is there. You know Gary, and our production team under the leadership of Kim Livesey, who does our productions. I'm going to send a shout out. I'm going to do it, Pastor, because they do an excellent job. A lot of work. And our leadership of our praise and worship team of Minister Shantae Nelson is just amazing. And so I'm just thankful that we can continue to do church as usual internally, but as well as what we're doing outside of the walls.
Well, before we get to the outreach, you made, this may be book number 2, or maybe this is the first book. How do you continue to touch your members when you don't gather? So all these things, the cooking on Zoom and the men ministry meeting, are all these still distance? Are they all still like on some type of Zoom or some type of digital platform?
Everything except the mountain walks on Saturdays. Everything else is digital. If we're hoping to start doing some things in person, but we're just waiting on the call to do that. But right now, I think we're having a great time.
And I think that is so wonderful, because we do know that the church is not a building, but the the whole fellowship is beyond Sunday service for many of us who really love the Lord, love being in fellowship. And I think the things that you all did, the drive-bys with the gifts and the refreshments and making sure your different ministries are still vital, because often it's the work of the ministry that keeps people connected, especially new believers. And whether it's the parking ministry to the hospitality ministry, and sometimes without those things, people get a little lost because maybe right now that's what made them, like you said, get their fix. So I think that's really great. And for those, and I see a lot of different ministers watching right now, for those of you who are doing online or digital or teleconference or even drive-in services, these are some really great ideas on how to do outreach with your members, you know. And I think it also speaks to the fact that Pastor Bell and Pastor Rod, is very obvious that it's not just about what the members do for your church. You really take to heart what it means to shepherd. And a lot of times, because we catch up on people after service, before service, at the altar calls, on Wednesday nights, that when that's taken away and you're told you can't be around each other, it's harder to sort of brainstorm how that could work. And even like, especially in the rural areas where a lot of our older members are not tech savvy. They don't have smartphones. They don't have internet. So a lot of your ideas are great, except that you guys had to handle the expectation of hugs and touch. Because that's the biggest thing I think about, even drive-in services. People get out of their car to worship and they're close to you and they want to hug. And I be doing this with my parents, like, Mommy, where's your shield? Roll your window up, because you're like having to be protective. So thank you for those ideas.
Can I share one more thing with you, Hope?
Sure.
I didn't want to neglect the fact that our kids are having a great time too.
Yeah.
They're doing youth ministry at every level, under the leadership of Tanya Phelps, the great Tanya Phelps, and who is the best youth leader in the country. I'll put her against everybody, Pastor. She's just amazing. The kids love her, and they're doing things also. So it's from the youngest to the oldest to keep them engaged with the ecclesia as we go forward.
Ecclesia. Oh, I like that. Yes. So Pastor Rod, I saw you guys all up and out and through. I saw police officers and I think also maybe homeless ministry. And you guys, even though we're shutting in or during those months of shutdown, you guys were outreaching. And I want to find out a little bit about that, and just in particular, what different things influenced you to promote that, as well as if there was anything in particular you had to think of in consideration to COVID-19.
Just to be basic with it, it's us patterning our life and the ministry's life after Jesus. There's three things I noticed with Jesus, and that he was, and I say this a lot, he was three things. He was intentional, he was relational, and he was missional. And so everything we do, we want to do it under that scope. And so for us, during this COVID season, we wanted to show the people who we are. You got a new ministry and people are saying, well, who is One Church? We wanted to show them our hearts. So we were being intentional about looking for opportunities to be a blessing. So not only there were instances where we were blessing our parishioners and the needs within our own body. We were looking for opportunities to be a blessing to our first responders. I think we started there right after COVID and said, hey, we want to be a blessing. So we went out and we sought out law enforcement and firefighters within our community, within the Marietta, Kennesaw community. And we went and we provided food and we provided meals for them and provided ways for them to continue to replenish their cupboards. And we just said, hey, what else can we do? And so we partnered with other associations that were doing drive-bys where people could come and get food. We had our parishioners that created a fund to send to these places. When some of these food distribution centers got low, we wrote checks and we replenished their supplies. So those were things that you didn't see, but there were still things behind the scenes that we were doing for our community. Because what we realized, and honestly, Hope, just being involved with some of these distribution centers, you couldn't be prejudice to think of who was going to get in that line. There were all different types of people in those lines from all different types of walks of life. And some of these people didn't look like what you thought they would look like. So we were happy to be a part of that. And really, that's one of the things that we were doing all along. And then came some of our other issues that we discussed: Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. And we literally began to have those discussions with our men. And we allowed them to just vent. And after they vented for a few weeks, we said, what does the word of God say about us? We all agreed that we wanted to have a response and not a reaction. And so we began to put together a plan for community outreach with those that were involved in some of these issues. So Pastor Bell and I reached out to our local chief of police in Ackworth and Kennesaw, and we said, let's talk about it and let's create a discussion that we hope can start some serious relations between our community and our law enforcement. They were gracious, and I'll be honest with you, there's so much more to come that you're going to see from One Church ATL, from Pastor Bill and I.
Wow.
We're actually involved in now the hiring of police officers, and not just police officers, but the leaders, the chief of police and the sheriffs and the captains. They want us at the table when they do any hiring going forward, because they said, One Church, you guys are you're going to hold us responsible, but you also want to partner with us. And they saw the value that we had for community. And this week we're going to be meeting with an advisory board that the city of Kennesaw has elected your church, One Church ATL, to actually create. And I spoke to the chief of police in Kennesaw yesterday. He said he's so excited about what we're doing and the impact we're going to have on the community. And he envisions it as something that will be duplicated in other cities. So I believe that out of the need, out of the condition arose another opportunity for us to do outreach for something that wasn't necessarily on our radar. And so I believe it's now part of our mission. It's not that we're chasing something. We haven't aborted the mission. This is now part of our mission. And just yesterday, we also talked with the city manager, and they said, we want One Church to be a part of helping us to bridge the gap for minorities and involvement with contracts in the city of Kennesaw and Ackworth. So not only are we now being involved with community from a law enforcement perspective, we're also going to be involved from an entrepreneurial economic perspective and making sure that all voices are heard, all people are brought to the table, so that we can begin to bridge the gap and inequity and even our economic situation. So I believe One Church, like Jesus, can be intentional, we can be relational, we can be missional about all the things that matter to our community. And we're there. You're going to see us there, One Church. You're going to see us there at the table preaching the gospel.
Yes.
Racism needs to be preached from a sin perspective. And I'm glad to partner with people that understand it that way, and we can address it and approach it from that way. So I talked a lot on that, but I hope I answered your question.
Oh, you did. I think it's so awesome that the community and these leaders, particularly law enforcement, in this type of tense era, see you all as partnering, not just protesting. And even though there's a place for protest, and I know that some of you all may have participated in those peaceful protests. I know someone's daughter inspired one. And for those who don't know, the church is called One Church Atlanta. But as many of you may or may not know, Atlanta now sort of spread, and there's Metro Atlanta, there's several counties, and in the area where they are, particularly as you heard them talk about Ackworth or Kennesaw or the Cobb County aspect of Metro Atlanta, historically has not always been known to be the most open to race relations. Very different than Fulton and DeKalb and maybe some of the counties you've heard about. To let you know, and not to suggest anything different, but it's very conservative. I mean, Newt Gingrich was from Cobb County. Like that was his district. So that gives you a sort of sense of when they say that these people, these managers of cities and police chiefs are saying, we want you at the table, that's huge. There are churches that have been there for decades who haven't had that entrance. But I understand also it's not just because, you know, someone just picked you out. You all have engaged. And I loved how your sort of launch, right? The launch of One Church ATL was during a time of lack and shut in, because you have already fashioned or created this pathway where the church is the church outside of the four walls. So right now, your members really collectively don't even know how to be members in the four walls anymore.
No.
Worship is the worship team's like, where are we filming? In the field today? Are we going to show the glory of God? You know, missions already was outward focused, but the expectation is for the church to be the church wherever they are. And even though we wouldn't have chosen a pandemic, I just think it's so powerful. And I pray any particular pastors that are looking or listening or church members are encouraged. Don't let your pastor have to be the only one carrying the burden. Even if you're not, even if you may have health compromise, so you yourself may not be the best champion to be the person to go talk to the chief of police in person, maybe the person to collect phone numbers and give it to someone else. Like, we can still work, not just as a church, but as power brokers, because the world is different. It's changing. They're looking for people of good hearts, pure hearts, people who can be trusted. And right before the pandemic, you know, all of last year and a couple of years, it's been this whole, oh my God, I just totally lost my thought. The movement against sexual harassment. So where I'm finding that, like, there is a qualitative and a quantitative measurement of the society looking to the people of God to help lead, because they're assuming, and prayerfully the assumption is right, that they're not going to have a huge moral issue with you. They're assuming that you're going to be a person who will keep your word. They're assuming that when you say we're going to partner with you, that you're not going to be underhanded or just doing it for fame and fortune. And I just think it's so exciting, and I'm so a little bit jealous, but I know that God is doing great stuff there, and it's with the people and in the timing that he needed to do it. You all have been such a blessing, and I thank you so much for your time. Our hour is almost up, but I've just been really, really inspired. I'm literally going to watch this back and take notes, because we're definitely, even the churches that, you know, I assist my parents with in pastoring, you know, looking at how we can connect more outside of the teleconferences or the drive-in service, or because we have prayer teleconference, Bible study teleconference, but even as we want to reach out, particularly to children during this time of uncertainty, and so many children are not going back to in-person school. Or one of the things that we haven't announced yet is going to be dealing with ex-offenders, because our church actually was started as an outreach of a prison ministry. So just to see how well you're walking in your purposes, although you may not have a Sunday building to gather hundreds of people in, is so powerful. I think God is up to something. None of this is a coincidence. So I'm going to let you all have the last word. You guys check them out at onechurchatl.org. They have such really fun services to watch. So you may want to check out a past service. The sermons are great. And as you can tell, the pastors are great. And behind every great man of God, maybe not, because you could be single, are great women of God. So you could also tell us a little bit or shout out the beautiful women of God that walk by you. But I'm just going to let you have the last word as we talk about being contagious, highly contagious. And that unity and outreach is highly contagious. If there's a word of encouragement for people to get infected during this season with those things, unity, looking for opportunities to unify, whether it's churches with each other, organizations, maybe even neighbors, as well as opportunities to reach out however you can, even if you're trying to keep yourself safe. You know, any type of encouragement you want to give, feel free. And I'll start with Pastor Rod. And can I say it's been a pleasure talking to you? I'm like, oh, I would have totally liked him being my pastor. I would have been like, yes. So
Yeah.
thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much. Thank you so much, Hope. And it's been a pleasure. Your spirit is just contagious. And
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
thank
been a
you.
pleasure speaking with you. The only thing I would say is when I look at the life of Jesus, he lived a life that was extremely contagious. And what I love about the life of Jesus is in 3 years, he impacted the entire world. He did it in 3 years. And many of us have been in ministry much longer than that. And I think about how he was able to make that impact was that he stayed focused. He didn't allow for distractions. And so I would say for us today, our encouraging word is let's just stay focused. We've got so much stuff out there, so much news, COVID, whatever you want to pick up. There's so many sensationalized things that are there, but let's do like Jesus and let's make an impact by being contagious, by staying focused on the main thing and continue to make the main thing the main thing. So God bless you. And I just thank you for this time. We love you guys.
Thank you. Pastor Bill.
I'll say this, since the beginning of the church, in the book of Acts, the church has been a place for people to come together, for us to go out to share the good news. And that gathering has to continue to have its potency. You look through history, even during slavery, the slaves came together under the cross to make it through. During the civil rights movement, we came to the church. It was the meeting place where the doctors, the lawyers, the teachers, everyone came to figure out how do we make this place a better place to live. I hope and pray that in 2020, that individuals, even watching your show, Hope, realize the value of being a part of a church family. It is very important for us to be in the same place, sharing our thoughts, like it or not, disagree or agree, to be in a place where you can hear the thoughts of others under the cross, so that once we come up with that game plan to affect change, we can leave that building, yes, like we're doing now, leave that building and disciple others and change this country to be a better place. So that's what we're trying to do. Thank God for blessing us to be a part of it. May he be glorified in everything that we do. And I want to, of course, echo the thoughts of Pastor Rod with you, Hope. You are an amazing person. I know your history. You have affected community change, especially when it comes to those who've been incarcerated. I thank you for what you're doing in the community, and thank you for having us on your show. It was a pleasure.
Wow, thank you all so much. I have to let you know that we've had people commenting and I just haven't been putting on the screen. Tracy Morgan says good morning.
Hey, Tracy.
You got a lot of good mornings. It's in the news now. Maya Thompson, hey family.
Hey, Maya.
Members. Oh, this is one of beautiful women of God. She's a prophetess and a talk show host in Atlanta. She sends her love. And Felicia Bryant, she's first lady up in North Carolina where her and her husband have Hope of Mount Sinai. She waves hello.
Hey, Larissa.
Larissa!
Hey,
everybody remembers like Larissa. Oh, hey, Larissa. Now, someone named Annette Hawthorne Parker, and she's up in the Northeast. She's been really, really blessed. And I just want y'all to be blessed. She definitely loves what you all do. Awesome work. You got to visit them when you come down to Metro Atlanta. And Pastor Connie Moat in Perry, Florida, she sends her heart. Actually, Pastor Connie Moat, she and her church, she's part of Church of God and Prophecy, they were slated to do my mother's anniversary, church anniversary, pastoral anniversary, but their what is it called, headquarters sitting down, basically a massive stop. And I just really appreciate actually her leadership because she was shutting her churches down before I knew probably anybody. And at first I know that had to be courageous because people were mixing doctrine and faith with whether you should close down. So thank you, Pastor Mo, for watching. You know what? Your example reminds me, we don't care who gets the credit, amazing things can be done. And I know I gave them the last word, but I just really want to encourage, particularly leaders out there, and I see there's a lot of leaders watching. Your thing may not be God's calling you to merge with another church and change the name and do a lot of things. But I think what we've seen in this highly contagious atmosphere, don't be afraid to join forces with other believers to do great things for God. I know here in Perry, Florida, I've been so blessed to see other members come to our drive-in service at 9:00 because their service is online and they can do both. Or other members join in our conference calls for prayer, or other members join in our Bible study because right now their church is not holding one. And the opposite is true. We're going to other people's events and their back to school bashes, and we give money to them and we support them. This is a great time as a body of Christ to become the body and be okay that you're not the foot and the hand, but use the foot and the hand because we're all one. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Rod, Pastor Stephan. Thank you, Hope More family. Continue to be elevators. This is Hope Dimps, and this is a Hope More show. I love you, and I mean it. Gentlemen, stay on after we exit. I love you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Have a wonderful Hope Day. There's no humps here. Have a great Wednesday.